Welcome to the Art of Conscious Living. Today I'm very, very pleased to have as my guest Dr. John Conger. He's the founder of the Institute, Analytical Somatic Training Institute here in the Bay Area. He's also the author of Jung and Reich, The Body as a Shadow, and Body in Recovery. And I'm very, very, very happy to speak to him on these subjects. How are you today, Doctor?
I'm fine, thank you.
So you took your time out today to come here and speak with me on a very busy schedule you have, and thank you for that. Well, let's start from the very beginning. I understand that you have been doing this since the 60s. You were in high school and private schools, and you were an English teacher, professor. And then the 70s came along, and then you became trained therapist. And instead of going a conventional way, you decided to go with Carl Jung, which a lot of people are very much embracing the Freudian way of being. And Jung can be looked upon as being on the fringe. And continuing on, then you were going to go and study with the Reich, Wilhelm Reich, which is very much on the somatic work. And even though the two gentlemen of Wilhelm Reich and Jung had never met each other, they were basically doing the same work. Jung doing the dream work, and Wilhelm Reich about the somaticness of the body, removing the disturbances of the body to allow the patient, the person in need of help, to connect with themselves. Now, on a conventional level, this does not happen in talk therapy. So, thank you for all your beautiful work you're doing, and tell us about your institute.
Well, I'll go back to more like my path that led me to my institute. Because I think when I was in college, I was very struck by the work of Carl Jung, and I was moved by his use of dreams and the way he thought about life, that the sort of mythology you live is important and how that affects us. And so he was something of a guide to me until I also woke up one day and my body felt contracted, and so I ended up seeing a Reichian therapist, and that began to attune me to working with my body as well.
So for those who don't know what a Reichian therapy would be, a session,
oh yes,
what session did you have? What was the experience like?
In Reichian work, Wilhelm Reich was in the 1920s. He became a Freudian psychoanalyst, but he grew up on a farm, and so he's very aware of the body itself. And he was very interested in energy and the flow of energy. And so he worked with people around their energetic flow. Some people had sexual problems, they were very poor. He worked with them to open up their energetic life. And so what I found was that I had split off a lot in my head because I like to read and think. Even though I used my body, I was athletic and worked out well. But there's a way in which we split out of our body and we don't feel our body. And so that led me to eventually study bioenergetics, which is developed by a follower of Reich's who worked with Reich, Alexander Lowen. And so when I was taught that, it's an international training, and but eventually I became a psychoanalyst. So I actually ended up going the Freudian path. So as well. So I kind of believe that no one person has the answer. You know, that there isn't like one truth. And so over the years I've studied Jung and Reich and Freud and Klein and Winnicott and all of these people, because I'm pretty much a teacher as well as having a private practice. And I feel like one kind of work fits one person, another kind of work fits another. There are people who really need me to be a Jungian to help them and help figure out how their life is going, and other people, their injuries are very early and they need me to understand what what happened to them in the first 6 months of life, what happened to them in the first 3 years of life. And their traumas are there, and I'm meant to work with that.
You mentioned you're a teacher. You teach other psychologists how to work with children here in San Francisco. Mm-hmm. What is that experience like, and what methods would you use to teach these other psychologists?
Well, I used to teach English for years. I taught English in high school, and I loved it. I loved working with adolescents, and they were enormously grateful for anyone to be kind to them and to let them and sort of admire their interests and their energy. And so that was the first 10 years. But I think my own difficulties and the pain that I had experienced in my life led me to switch from working on a doctorate in English to working on a doctorate in psychology. And so now I teach graduate students in psychology, and I have a private practice. And then I have this training program, which I'm trying to train people to work not only with the body, but with the analytic material, that we're not just split. It's the Descartes split no longer applies. I mean, it doesn't make sense to think that there's a mind that's somehow separate from the body, because we're walking around with both. And Freud actually got his start because he was trying to understand why people had physical illnesses that couldn't be explained by medicine. And so he ended up in the 19th century developing psychoanalysis to explain the correspondence between the body and the psyche.
Which was the talk therapy.
Yeah. And but it started that they first approached it with massage and with baths and all these things to help people basically work through somatic problems. And Reich came in the 1920s and took Freud's theories very literally and very seriously, that this thing he called libido was a real energy that was going through the body and that got blocked. And so he worked on that and developed this whole skill. And so I think there are certain therapists that really want to understand the body as well as how the mind works and the correspondence between the two.
So what point in time did the somatic work, you mentioned Wilhelm Reich in the 20s, and then there was a period of decades after that it was lost. Is it making a resurgence in the last decades?
Well, that's such a good question, because what's happened in the last 20 years is a tremendous interest in neuroscience. And so the idea of, and certainly evolutionary biology, both of which fascinate me, because what they discover now about the brain and the relationship to the brain and body is that in the sort of very early development, mammal development basically, we sort of brainstem development, core consciousness, we develop maps. And so the brain creates these maps, and so it teaches, it learns how to move our hand and touch our nose and things like that. And so the brain is intimately connected to the mind, and so the division, the sort of the Descartes division, is really a sort of an intellectual assumption that really doesn't measure up to what we're living. And so now we're much more aware of this mind-body connection, and
What
that's what I
studies
teach.
now are being done on the neural
Well,
mechanics of the science?
well, a lot of
the
the
mind.
Releases of chemicals like dopamine, serotonin, oxytocin, these things have been recorded and studied, and then they have MRIs where they can actually see parts of your brain light up when you talk about things. They discovered this thing called mirror neurons, where it's, in a way you could ask the question, how does a mother know so intuitively what the child is thinking? Well, they discovered in the 1990s that by working with these monkeys, they had, by accident, they discovered what's called mirror neurons. And so that when they were working on one monkey and taking pictures of the sort of how the monkey was thinking, another monkey that was in the room had the same images going off in their mind, and they weren't even being worked with. And so that they realized that somehow these monkeys were attuned to each other, and they studied this further, and they realized that in some miraculous way, say you and I are talking to each other, your mind, your brain might be lighting up in the same areas as my brain, just by attunement. And so they're
So your brain is affecting my brain,
Yeah.
chemistry.
Yeah.
And it's we know so little of all this, what we're speaking about,
Yeah.
in the sense where we know about the five senses,
Yeah.
but perhaps there is many other senses that
Very much.
we're not knowing.
Yeah.
And there seems to be a lot of research that needs to happen here.
Yeah. And I try to teach people a lot about intuition and attunement, that if I can be present in my own body and be grounded in my body, that it creates a kind of space between us where it allows you more room to begin to think. But also that it's very typical that people that work with the body for a long time can put their hand on your arm and know what's wrong. And it's not just like they've studied anatomy and they know the structure, which of course they have, but they develop a kind of intuitive knowing. And so a lot of people that want to develop in this work, that they need a procedure for how to begin to intuit what's going in the body in ways that are not rationally available. And so we're kind of open to experiences that ordinarily one wouldn't expect.
I would think that there's an expression, extrasensory perception. I would think that it would be much more apropos to say effective sensory perception.
Mm-hmm.
That we are using all our senses, and as you're saying,
Mm-hmm.
that when you are in your presence and you are full, you're allowing this transferring of energy to happen, so the other person has a way to calibrate their vibration and balance themselves. And so it's about holding your space and being mindful of that for others too.
That's very much it. That there's they've taken pictures of two people just meeting each other, and then looked at them frame by frame, and sort of unconsciously and intuitively, what happens is two people's gestures and their movement begin to integrate and coordinate.
They synchronize.
Yeah, they synchronize. And so there's so much going on that happens just with the body, or doesn't happen, where people's energy is blocked or whether their energy is freer. And so I teach people how to look at energy and see and look how people are, where their energy is lacking and blocked and where it's flowing.
Your institute, the Analytical Somatic Training Institute, What is this about of the training? How is it different than the conventional training, even though you are very aware of the conventional and you have embraced many different school of thought at any given moment of time, and you don't pigeonhole yourself in one type of thinking and one being, which is quite unusual, which is very beautiful.
Well, that is I jump fences. I don't, everybody, I'm against tribalism, you know, it's like, this is, with chimpanzees, you know, they're, within the little group of chimpanzees, they're sometimes altruistic, they're thoughtful, they do nice things to other chimpanzees, but every now and then they start to scream and get in a state and they go off and kill other chimpanzees in another group and kill their babies and things like that. It's kind of, in a way, it sort of helps me understand something about human nature, which is quite terrible, actually, and disturbed me for many years, actually, that there is this quality in people that will sort of turn on their neighbor, like the Holocaust and like what they did to the Armenians. And there's something that happens in human nature that's quite terrible in this way, and so I'm very interested in human nature in this deep way, and how we can work together and work better. And tribalism is sort of a reflection of that, everybody, that one system has the truth, and so if you're a psychoanalyst, which I am, then we have all the answers and nobody else does, or that we have the best answers, you know. And then the Jungians, they're kind of have their little tribe, and we have our tribe, and I haven't found life very useful that way. So I find that there are things that Jung said that are quite brilliant and wonderful and helpful in working with people, and things that Freud said that are fabulous and quite great, and there are things that other people in the field have said.
Such as Abraham Maslow.
Yeah, exactly. And so I'm open to all of that, and what I try to teach is what are good maps for therapists to have when they're working with people. So this is a good, I like to have a good toolbox of things. So someone comes in, they're 60 or they're 50 and they've lost their meaning, or their story has come to an end. It may be that their sense of self is weak and uncertain, and I can talk about their early childhood and help them understand how that might be. But also there's this whole aspect of what life means, what myth are they living, and that's Jung. And I can also look and see where their body is in terms of where their energy, how to get to feel more comfortable in their body and to feel more present. And these are all like following my own injuries. I had the good fortune to have some difficulties in my early life and make mistakes and have a hard road in certain ways, and that taught me. So in a way, I've been trying to heal myself, you know, by going in these paths. And as I figured out what was wrong with me, then I realized, then I came to study in that kind of theory that helped me come into balance.
So you are your own doctor, and
yeah.
Your own experiment,
Yes.
where you could see what works for you, and then you could pass this on to others.
I was trying to get over my own foolishness, you know, the disasters that I create all by myself.
Wonderful. You mentioned about the tribe. Let's go back to that. Where do you think this comes from? And do you think it's an instinctiveness of nature that we have in the primates and as humans? And this can turn to a mob mentality at any given moment as a tribe.
Yeah.
And our sense of self, our good self, is lost at that time when we join the collective, the mob. And what do you think? Where is this coming from? Is this complete loss of consciousness and complete hypnosis to self of that you are joining something that ordinarily you would not join or do?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think that I'm fascinated by evolution, basically, and so we only they used to look at these hunter-gatherer tribes that we once were, up until about 12,000 years ago, when we developed agriculture and began to create an easy way to make protein and stuff like that. But before then, we were hunter-gatherers for millions of years, a small group of people wandering around looking for things to kill and eat, you know, and it seemed to work pretty well for a long time. But we only developed language maybe roughly 100,000 years ago. And so, and we didn't get good at it till about 50,000 years ago. And so when they've looked at these hunter-gatherers in the past, they've thought that the reason that they were very much like the chimpanzees in the sense that they hunted and killed each other. If you weren't in that group, that hunter-gatherer group, then you were the enemy and competing. And it sort of fit the sort of philosophy of the survival of the fittest kind of philosophy. But very recently they studied hunter-gatherer tribes, and they discovered that, on the contrary, they're not made up mostly of their own relatedness, but in fact a lot of the women in the tribe went out, not just the men, and went out and joined other tribes. And so that part of our survival has been our sociability. And it's a complete reversal of the way they thought about it. So actually, it becomes more and more, at first it seems obvious that the way that the Holocaust would happen is that we have this kind of chimpanzee mentality that we would go off and kill our neighbor, you know, just get in a state and do that. But in fact, now the story is that we were actually much more socially related, and so these tribes, these hunter-gatherers would barter with each other and have interchanges. And so I think that it becomes more bewildering in certain ways why we could turn so easily on our neighbor. I have a friend of mine who's Croatian, and I asked her, I said, your family came from the small village which you visited. How do you understand that they turned on the Jewish members that they had known so intimately? And she said she thought it was envy that the Jews in that village were more sophisticated, more educated, and wealthier. And yet, when they were cordoned off, the village sent, the Nazis only let children visit the encampment, and the children brought food and tried to, and so I think there's a kind of envy and resentment that people have that are below the surface that kind of bubbles up and finds expression in really insidious ways.
So in a way, it's talking about survival.
Yeah.
That other person wants to survive, and in order for the other person to disappear.
Yeah.
On a quite a fundamental level,
Yeah.
it's as simple as that.
Yeah.
That if they are no longer, then they are surviving. Whether it was millions of years before, the hunter and gatherer, when they had no language to express this, it was basically a survival, and now it's survival again. And in a contemporary world today, it's still of this survival. And when we become separate, when we have this feeling that we are separate, it's I against others, or we are on our own island, then it's quite possible that the negativity can happen at that time.
Well, I think family is strong, and so what happens is that people kind of stick with their own kind, and then make other people the enemy, and or build resentment because other people are better or more sophisticated or have more money or something like that. And the work I do is to help people try and understand their own, the range of their own feeling, and what's getting in their way, but also how to open up their heart and be more passionate and be more present in the world.
Beautiful work. Well, I'd like to invite you back in the future, very near future. We have so much more to talk about. And what final thoughts do you have that you would like to share that would be very dear to you?
Well, I think that what I've learned getting older has to do with working to become more present, not only personally, sort of intellectually and emotionally, but in my body, so that I teach people to ground, to feel their legs, and to open up their breath, and to have access to a range of emotion, and not just sit on one, and also to have an intention to really be here, because a lot of people, they're born, but they never actually decide to be here. So I ask students, have you ever really intended to be here? And there are always a few people that never did.
They take it for granted.
Yeah, they're backing into life rather than entering in more passionately, you know.
Fantastic. I mean, this turns the whole thing upside down, where it really puts the onus on the person to take responsibility and ask these inquiring questions of the possibilities that could be.
Exactly. Well, there's a lot of pain in the world, and so it's hard for people back away, and they forget to return, you know.
They forget to return.
Yes.
How beautiful. Well said. Well, it's been an absolute pleasure speaking with you, and I look forward to our next conversation. Thank you, John.
Well, thank you very much, Victoria.
Thank you. From the Art of Conscious Living, please do take care of yourself. Be kind to yourself and to others. Thank you.